Imagine a letter, full of hope, that becomes your death warrant. That's the story of Anthony Burns, a soft-spoken preacher whose capture turned the city of Boston upside down and put the entire nation on trial. His wasn't a stealthy escape in the dead of night. It was a public spectacle, a national drama that exposed the raw, brutal heart of the Fugitive Slave Act. Born in 1834, the 13th child of an enslaved cook in Virginia, Anthony Burns was different. While Virginia law forbade it, he secretly taught himself to read, poring over the Bible. He even preached to his fellow enslaved people, finding a powerful voice in his faith. By the time he was a young man, he had one unshakable conviction: God made me a man, not a slave. In February 1854, at just 20 years old, he made his move. With the help of a sympathetic sailor, Burns hid himself in the dark, filthy coal bin of a ship bound for the north. For 3 grueling weeks, he endured the darkness, praying he wouldn't be discovered. Finally, on March 1st, he stepped onto the docks of Boston Harbor. Broke, but breathing free air for the first time in his life. He found a job at a clothier's shop, earning $4 a week. He was finally, impossibly, free. Overjoyed, Burns did something tragically human. He wrote a letter to his enslaved brother back in Virginia, telling him he was safe and happy in Boston, but in a fateful attempt to cover his tracks, he postmarked the letter from Canada. The lie was too thin. The postmaster saw right through it. The letter's content screamed Boston. He forwarded it directly to Burns's owner, Charles Suttle. A single stamp, a loving gesture, had betrayed him. On May 24, 1854, the past caught up with him. A U.S. Marshal and his posse burst into Burns's room, arresting him on a bogus robbery charge. He was dragged before a federal commissioner, where Suttle presented his proof of ownership. Under the Fugitive Slave Act, that was all it took. There was no jury, no chance for Burns to testify, no appeal. It was a sham trial from the start. His lawyers argued it was a case of mistaken identity, but the law was designed for one outcome. On June 2nd, the commissioner ruled against him. Anthony Burns was to be returned to slavery, but Boston, the so-called cradle of liberty, would not stand for it. The news spread like wildfire. 50,000 citizens took to the streets, enraged that this law had brought the chains of slavery to their doorstep. Abolitionist leaders like Wendell Phillips and Theodore Parker delivered fiery speeches to massive crowds. A group of vigilantes even stormed the courthouse with axes and pistols, trying to free Burns. In the chaos, a deputy marshal was killed. Riots erupted across the city. The situation became so volatile that President Franklin Pierce sent in the military, over 1,500 troops, U.S. Army soldiers, Marines, and cavalry, with 22 cannons were deployed to keep order. The federal government spent a staggering $42,000, nearly $1.5 million in today's money, just to return one man to bondage. On June 14th, the city witnessed a horrifying spectacle. It was called the Funeral March. Anthony Burns, in chains, was paraded through the streets of Boston, from the courthouse to the wharf. He was flanked by over 100 soldiers with bayonets, their drums beating a slow, mournful dirge. 30,000 people lined the route in stunned silence. Some wailed in grief. Others hurled insults at the guards. Buildings were draped in black, and church bells tolled as if for a funeral. A minister cried out, "Behold the price of liberty." Burns was loaded onto a ship like cargo and sent back south, back in Virginia. Burns became a reluctant celebrity, but the abolitionists in Boston hadn't forgotten him. The Boston Vigilance Committee worked tirelessly, raising over $1,300, an enormous sum at the time, to buy his freedom. Suttle eventually agreed to the sale. By September, Anthony Burns was officially purchased by a Boston reverend, an Underground Railroad hero named Leonard Grimes. In October, Grimes escorted Burns back north. He had a brief, emotional reunion with his family in Virginia before returning to Boston, where 3,000 people cheered his arrival. But even then, he wasn't truly safe. Slave catchers were still a threat, so they continued on, traveling another 400 miles by train and shipped to St. Catharines, Ontario, a haven for freedom. Seekers in Canada, where figures like Harriet Tubman also found refuge. In Canada, Anthony Burns finally found peace. He studied theology and became the pastor of a local church. But his freedom was tragically short-lived. The damp conditions of his Boston jail cell had taken a toll on his health. He contracted tuberculosis and passed away on July 17, 1862. At the age of just 28, he died only a few months before Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. Though his life was cut short, his impact was immeasurable. His trial and the riots it caused led Massachusetts to pass a bold new personal liberty law in 1855, giving accused fugitives the right to a jury trial and forbidding state officials from aiding in their capture. The public outrage fueled the bleeding Kansas conflict and drove sales of Uncle Tom's Cabin. It showed the entire country the true, poisonous nature of the Fugitive Slave Act. In the decade that followed, over 20,000 black Americans fled to Canada, seeking the safety that the United States could not provide. Anthony Burns didn't win his freedom in a courtroom, but his quiet dignity during that terrible march through Boston spoke louder than any legal argument. It broke the conscience of a nation and became a powerful spark that helped ignite the fires of the Civil War. From a stowaway in a coal bin to a symbol of resistance, one man's story revealed the soul of a country at war with itself. Thank you for watching. If you found this story as powerful as I did, please like this video and subscribe for more hidden histories.